In this video, I will introduce you to entering a basic transaction in POS. To log on, type your user ID and password and tap Login. POS can be configured to display the customer lookup screen before every transaction, as shown here. Bobby Joe is a regular customer at Bird Store. You look her up by entering Joe. Most of the time, you will be able to scan items to add them to a transaction. What can you do if an item doesn't scan? The first thing you should try is to enter the lookup code into the lookup field. The 10-ounce pecan seed cake isn't scanning, so you enter the item lookup code into the lookup field. In this case, the item code is the UPC code from the product packaging. If you don't know the item lookup code, or the item lookup code that you entered isn't working, you can also use name, alias, department, or category to look up the item. Just like you saw with customers, you can enter partial information to pull up any matching items. For example, entering Suet will look up any items with a lookup code, name, alias, department, or category that contains Suet. You can add the 8-ounce basket feeder by tapping it and tapping Select, or by tapping it twice. Let's look up another item. This time, let's enter cake and see what items match that search. You only added one item last time. What if you want to add more than one item? That's easy. Just tap once on each item that you want to add and then tap Select. What if you want to add multiples of the same item to the transaction? Maybe the birds are eating a lot of suet at this time of the year, so Bobby Joe is buying 3 of the 10-ounce pecan seed cakes, so she has enough to last a month. You can scan each item separately, or you can scan one item and then manually change the item quantity. To manually change the item quantity, you can either enter the number on the keypad or use the plus or minus buttons to increase or decrease the quantity. You can see that the number in the quantity column is now 3. What if you have scanned an item and the customer decides they no longer want to buy it? If you haven't tendered the transaction, then you can just delete it from the transaction list. If you're unfamiliar with the word tender, it's another way of saying accept payment. It's easy to delete an item from the transaction if you haven't accepted payment. However, once you have accepted payment, you have to follow your store's policies for voiding transactions or processing returns and exchanges. Now that you're comfortable with adding items, changing item quantities, and removing items from the transaction list, let's look at how to tender transactions. As you learned a moment ago, tendering a transaction means accepting payment for the transaction. When you have rung up all of the items in the transaction and the customer is ready to pay, you just have to tap Transaction and Tender Sale. The total due is the amount the customer must pay for all of the items in the transaction. The total due includes any discounts that have been applied, as well as any taxes or service fees that have been charged. The total tendered is a running total of payment amounts from all tender types. A tender type is, you guessed it, a payment method, such as a credit card, debit card, check, or cash. Your store may also accept other tender types, such as gift certificates, gift cards, store credit, food stamps, or foreign currencies. Occasionally, a customer will want to pay the total due using 2 or more tender types. For example, they may want to pay half using a credit card and half using cash. The total tendered changes as you enter the amounts for each tender type. Using 2 or more tender types is sometimes called splitting a payment. You will see a balance amount in red if the total tendered is less than the total due. You will see a change amount in green if the total tendered is greater than the total due. You will only see a change amount in green if the customer pays for all or part of the transaction using a tender type that allows over-tendering, such as cash. Over-tendering is another way of saying overpaying. Some tender types, such as credit cards, do not allow over-tendering. You can only use them to pay a portion of the total due amount or the full total due amount, and no more. However, customers will often over-tender with cash by giving you a $20 for a $15 purchase, for example. What do you do if the customer wants to pay the total due using one tender type, but they have two different sources of that tender type? For example, a customer may want to split the payment between two different credit cards. Credit card is one tender type, but the cards are issued by two different institutions or sources. When this happens, just tap the plus button next to the tender type. Another row displays with the same tender type. Enter the amount the customer wants to pay using each source in a separate row. Let's complete the transaction and issue the receipt. To do this, just click OK. The receipt will print on the printing device configured for your POS lane. Gift receipts are like normal receipts, except they do not show amounts. People may ask for a gift receipt for a transaction if they are giving one or more of the items to another person, and there is a chance the person may want to exchange the item or items for something else. Depending on how POS is configured at your store, you may be prompted to print a gift receipt for every transaction. And that's it. As you've seen, it's really easy to enter transactions, accept payments, and print receipts. The last thing we will look at is how to log out. You should always log out whenever you have to step away from your POS lane. For example, you might need to leave your POS lane to help a customer, to restock or clean displays, or to do a cash drop. You should always log out of POS at the end of your shift before you go home. To log out, tap Operations Secure Logout.